I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over. And Essie Chambers, I'm so excited to talk to you. One, Massachusetts women hanging out on Zoom. But more importantly, I've read your debut novel, Swift River, and it is pretty cool. And I cannot wait to introduce you to a whole new pack of readers. So before we really get started, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and your debut novel.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm such a fan of this podcast, so I'm just so happy to be here to talk to you about my debut novel, which is, it's called Swift River, as you said. It is coming out on June 4th. It is a family saga that is centered around this oddball teenage girl named Diamond Newberry, who is struggling with what it means to be the only person of color in this all-white, crumbling New England mill town. The novel starts at the beginning of this really tumultuous summer for her. She gets a letter from a relative that she's never met, and it just sort of changes the course of her life. She discovers that her family has secrets, that her town has this hidden history that's also a dark part of American history, and that she has this very powerful ancestral inheritance and legacy. So her journey is kind of about getting these roots in her family and her history, and growing past this world that she's in to become the person she's supposed to be.
And she's a great character. I mean, she's funny, but she's also a little pissy. She's not thrilled. I mean, but she's also a teenager. And you set Swift River, the bulk of the story really takes place in 1987. And I'm kind of loud because really, who wants to revisit the 80s? And then here you are. And I was there for every single minute of it. Every single minute of it. Can we talk about why you chose to set? Because there you flashback sort of between 1980, 1987, and then we go further back in time. But the 80s, that's a choice.
It is a choice. I actually love I think the 80s are just so hilarious. Like, the sort of the pop culture, the hair helmets, the big girl, the jazz
shoulder pads,
just ridiculous slang. And anytime you move past technology, you get a whole, it opens up a whole other world. Yeah. And, it's a time when, you had a much different kind of freedom from your parents and could roam wild and all that stuff. But I am an 80s person as well. And it just makes me laugh. The details of the 80s are really funny to me.
The hair. I mean, if we just start with the hair and the things that we did, I mean, stealing a line from Andre Dubus, which I think actually is from the 70s. He's like, we used to roam the streets like packs of dogs.
Yes.
We weren't completely feral, but it was an entirely different moment. Our parents were working so much they were kind of like, yeah, you're fine. Feed yourselves. We'll see you when we see you kind of thing.
That's right. It's also a very particular moment in terms of race and culture and how they intersect and what people had exposure to what. And so it felt like if I was going to create this little bubble of a town that was white with this brown person in the center of it, there was the absence of blackness was going to be really loud.
The absence of blackness, but also class, because you're working with a very sort of blue collar community and survival is different.
That's right.
And also it's a moment in America where I think if I look back on sort of where we were, right, and like where we were going, Diamond's mother is having a rough go of things financially, and they're still in their house. I mean, there's a sign in their front yard saying the bank is coming for their house, but they are still in their house. They are not living out of their car. They are not in dire straits. And I feel like we passed this moment sort of in our cultural history where you don't get to hold on to your house like that. Yeah. Like immediately bad things happen and immediately you're on the street or you're couch surfing or whatever. So to have them in this world, and Diamond's mother too is living in the house that she grew up in and that her mother grew up in, that her grandmother, Diamond's mother, so Diamond's great-great-grandmother, to have that connection to place and to yet still sort of not be of that place, watching Diamond navigate that is wild. It is trippy. And the soundtrack, of course, is like 80s hair metal.
That's right. Hair metal and some classic rock too. And then, towards the end, introducing a little bit of pop as her tastes. She's a big top 40s girl as well. But yes, it's sort of socially, that's what's happening is hair metal and classic rock all around her.
So when did Swift River start for you? I mean, was Diamond the first character who showed up, or was it more of a picture of a place and you realized, oh, wait, there's a story here?
Yeah, it definitely revealed itself to me in layers. I did not have a sense of the whole of the story. I always knew that I wanted to tell a story about a person who was the only one in a world that didn't look like them, and the only person of color in an all-white town. That was my growing up experience. So I had a lot to draw from. It's completely fictional, but there's so much emotion to pull from. That was kind of where it started. And I think there are probably like 4 layers of the book, and each layer came with I wrote this over the course of 9 years. It took me a long time to finish. And so, different version of Essie, but also as I figured, Diamond came first.
Yeah.
And as I figured out what she needed and what the story needed, then another layer would be added. And so that's how it went.
Wait, so 9 years, that includes your MFA at Columbia, right? But also your working career in film production, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're juggling all of the things at once.
Well, actually, so my working career so I was a television exec before I was an independent producer. I had this incredible career working for Viacom for a couple of their channels, for Nickelodeon, for a teen network called The N, and then later for BET. And I would say actually that the beginning seeds of Diamond were born around the time that I was working in teen television, because I fell in love with telling stories about that age. And there's just nothing richer than a moment when you don't really have the language for what's happening to you, but everything is happening in such an intense way that we all recognize that. And so I started writing around then. I adapted. I was lucky enough to be part of an adaptation for a book called Miracles Boys, written by Jacqueline Woodson.
Yep.
And Jackie and I became friends. And she gave me the gift of all gifts. She had a bunch of friends in her life who, like me, had careers or were doing things and not tending to their writing. And she said, listen, I want to shut you all up. I'm going to bring you together. We're going to form a writers group and a community, and you're going to do what writers do. You're going to write. And so it was the first moment that I was able to think of myself as a writer, that I was able to have a community of writers to draw, to lean on. And then I really, that was before grad school. And that was when I really started to work through this world and the beginnings of Diamond.
I love hearing that, though, because I mean, the community piece is so important, because Diamond doesn't know that she's not really part of her community. She has no idea. I mean, she knows her mom, she knows her dad, she knows her school, she knows where she kind of fits in the world. She doesn't really like it necessarily, but she doesn't have words to describe it beyond, this is where I'm from. I'm from Swift River. This is home.
Yeah.
And this is the place that I'm from. And she sort of looks at her parents, like we all look at our parents, right? And we go, wait, you were people before I met, what? How, you had lives before, we showed up. And of course, you look at your parents and you're like, no, what? No, not possible. So watching her sort of puzzle things through. And again, I do love the fact that there is very limited tech. Like there's a TV, there's a tape deck in the car, all of that kind of thing. But letters, and I am going to stay a little vague here, but letters do have a role in this. And I just love the idea of this teenager sitting down and, being a little snippy in some responses. I mean, it's pretty clear when we see the exchange between her and her correspondent. She's being a teenager. She's being a total teenager. And just sort of saying, well, no, why should I, change my behavior for X, Y, or Z? She's very genuine, which we don't always get.
Thank you.
As you're setting it up, though, right? Because you are cutting across a couple of generations. There's some history happening. There was some research that we're going to sort of get to in a vague way. When did you know you had her voice, though? Because that's the thing that kept me stuck to her. Because, teenagers can be a handful, but I really like this kid. I really, really like this kid a lot. So when did you know you had her voice?
I had written, it was in grad school, I had written a bit of the book. And I remember I shared it with a friend. I'm going to call her a friend. She was probably maybe a little bit more of a friend to me. And she, that's not fair. She was a friend, but my writing was maybe not her cup of tea. And so she was very critical in a way. And I just kept going back to her, wanting her to like what I was writing. And she had read the first chapter, and I think she said, use the word cute. She said it was cute. And which is like, those are fighting words.
That's not the word I would have used to describe the first chapter of this book. But
completely there's no relation to the story at all. And so I was just sort of fired up and mad and also scared. This felt like a last shot for me doing this in grad school. And so I just channeling all of that, I wrote the first couple sentences, and the first couple sentences are, the summer I turned 16, I am so fat that I can't ride my bike anymore. So I let it get stolen on purpose.
Yeah.
And as soon as I wrote those sentences, it became clear who she was. Right. She is a person in crisis. She is at a fork in the road, and yet she still is trying to claim some agency over her life. That those sentences really were and then from there, I just, I had 2 Post-its on my computer at all times. Mm-hmm. Tell the truth and make yourself laugh. And that was my guiding principle for Diamond.
And there's a lot of laughter in this book. I mean, I laughed a lot as I was reading it. And I think we've all experienced that kind of coming of age where you're like, oh no, wait, is this kid going to be okay? Like, I genuinely felt at the end of this book that no matter what happens, Diamond's going to be okay. And it's not, I mean, you do the writerly thing and you drop some hints and whatnot, but I genuinely believed it based on my experience of this kid and her story and sort of how she's relating to the world and who her friends are. And she's got a friend called Shelley who's kind of a stitch. And Shelley does what she says she's going to do, and she takes off and ends up going somewhere else. But Diamond's the one who's kind of like, yeah, but she never landed right. Like, it's one thing to leave. And I'm thinking, this is a really smart 16-year-old, but given her background, it makes perfect sense that she would be the kid to notice. And a little bit of it, of course, is looking back and whatnot. But she's a very, very smart 16-year-old, but not overly mature for her age, because I don't really want a teenager who sounds like a 40-year-old. Thanks.
Thank you, because that's hard to do, is sort of, she's very emotionally intelligent. But yeah, she doesn't have the language for it yet. She's learning, like, she's like bridging the gap between what she knows and how she expresses that. So
the first time I got my hands on your manuscript, I didn't know anything about you. I just knew that I had this book. I didn't even really have any flap copy or catalog copy or anything, because Julie sent it to me and I was like, yeah, just send it to me and I'll start reading. And I like to read blind. I really do. Like, flap copy is great, catalog copy, it's all helpful, don't misunderstand me, but sometimes you just want to get your hands on the words on the page. And I'm going and I'm like, oh yeah, Massachusetts. Oh yeah, there's this moment in Massachusetts before the money is everywhere. And I mean, I grew up in a place where literally there were, another side of the railroad tracks, right? And you could tell whose parents had a certain kind of job based on like what the front yard looked like or what was in the driveway or all of these weird signifiers, right? And you have planted us firmly in sort of a very working class. Like, I know what this landscape looks like. I know what this town looks like. I know what the houses that Diamond likes. At one point, they're at a party at one of her father's colleagues. And I'm like, oh yeah, we all know that back porch. So how much of that is you giving yourself room to roam in your own memory, or just saying, hey, listen, this is just what it is. This is just where it needed to be. Diamond's driving more than I am.
I think it was a little bit of both. I mean, like you said, it's a very particular moment. And it's kind of like a mush a lot of the mill towns around me. Where I grew up I was a little bit more suburban than it was rural. And there were just so many places that were devastated when the industry left. I wanted to capture that moment after. And so yeah, it was with a lot of intention. And I was able to pull from a lot of my own experience. I was roaming wild and going to keggers in the woods, and all of the the life I'm talking about.
I do.
And so it's so specific. I think I was talking to a New England audience the other week, and the idea of being a part of like the New England literary canon. It's like the story, and the stories are so specific, that I wanted to try and get at that world and then place someone in the center of it who was just so completely a fish out of water.
I miss the accent. Remember when we were kids and you could still like really hear the accent depending on where you were, kind of thing, and what was around you. And people don't get it right in the movies. They try really hard and they just don't get it right. Yeah, and it's just wild because like the further south you go too, and like the Rhode Island accent is not the same as it's wild. It's just, but I felt like I could hear, like I felt like I knew this terrain really, really well. And you grew up sort of northwest, right? Northwest of Boston?
Yes, in Western Massachusetts.
Okay. So, you were even further west than I thought. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because I was on the east side. And so closer to Boston than not, hello, T and the Red Line and all of that kind of thing. And your piece of Massachusetts was not that different from mine. And yeah, we're both suburban, all of that. But there's just something about the place. And especially when you're black or brown, and you are the absolute minority. I can promise you everyone knew who my brother and I were.
Wow, we really had the same experience. Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't because, we were running wild or anything like that. It's just we were the only, we were really easy to spot in a crowd.
Yeah.
Really, really easy to spot in a crowd.
Yeah.
And so to have you capture that all these years later, right? Like, I'm sure there's some kid in Ohio who's going to pick up this book and be like, oh, yeah.
I hope. That would make me so happy.
Right?
Well, it's that thing of being both like invisible at times, and then just like you're walking down the street on fire at the same time. It's sort of like depending on the day, you get one or the other.
So when Danzy Senna's Caucasia came out, and you remember that book, right?
It's just game changer for me.
Yeah, completely. And I did not grow up in Jamaica Plain, and there were times where I was like, would it have been easier in Jamaica Plain? And the answer is who knows. But I love that book. And I love everything about it, the vibe, and I'm just going to say, if you've read Caucasia, you need Swift River. If you love Caucasia the way I love Caucasia, you need Swift River.
That is an incredible compliment. Thank you.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that kind of terrain, right? Like it's I don't know, I still fall back on halfy as a phrase, and it's just like, I'm dating myself, and there's got to be a better way to describe it. But biracial seems so serious and academic, and I'm like, well, how do you really describe being the kid who has a white parent, who's living in a community where you kind of don't know that you're not like everyone else, but you really do know you're not like everyone? Like, how do you navigate that space? So again, I mean, yeah, I'm quite fond of Diamond and watching her muddle her way through. But you give her a lot of backstory. You give her family a lot of history. Sundown towns are a real thing in Massachusetts. Or throughout New England, I should say. It's not just a Massachusetts thing. Would you explain sundown towns for listeners who might not know?
And sure, and I will admit to not really fully understanding what they were. So sundown towns are essentially they're all white towns by design. And that design is either, happening through laws and ordinances, or violence and terrorism and murder. And the name came from the practice of sometimes putting a sign, sometimes right next to the welcome sign of the town, that said, N-word or what, other marginalized people as well. Like if you are here past the time that the sun sets, you will be strung up.
Yeah.
And those signs stuck around until way into the, They
were there in the 60s and 70s.
That's correct.
And people can say, oh no, we had our evolutionary moment. And I'm like, no, they were there well. And in some cases, probably into the 80s too. Those weren't quite as visible as the ones you saw in the 60s and 70s, where it was just like, oh, hi.
Yeah. And I thought that they were, my understanding just from what I'd read and what I'd seen in movies is that they were a Southern thing for the most part. They were primarily in the North and the Midwest and the Northwest, not just also, but primarily. And that I kind of blew my head open. And sort of also blew my book open, that discovery. Yeah.
So how much research did you need to do that? And again, we're leaving out plot points because everyone should have a chance to experience Swift River the way I got to. No, you don't have to read it blind. You can read the flap copy. But at the same time, obviously, we want to stay spoiler-free in this conversation. But I never felt like you were writing a history book. I knew that there was stuff that you had included that I did not previously know. And maybe I knew a tiny bit more about sundown towns, but history nerd, this happens, whatever. But in terms of the kind of research that you needed to do, also to keep the story sort of fresh and clean and give it Diamond's voice and not just Essie channeling, 16, 17-year-old Essie, because you're not writing a memoir. You are trying to create an entirely new landscape.
Yeah. When I understood that Diamond was part of her struggle was being as isolated as she was, kind of rootless in the sense that, her father is missing, her grandmother has just died a couple of years ago. Like there is really no sense of other people that she is connected to apart from her mother. And that is a feeling that's like drowning to her. The beginning stages of the book, a lot of the frame was about, will she stay or will she go? And it felt like she was just running from this. She wanted to run from town. And I realized she needs to run towards something. And I need to give her something to run towards and something to give her confidence in herself, that she can be something other than all of the ways that she's other and the daughter of this very troubled mother. And so I went looking for some background about Black communities in the early 20th century in rural New England. Sometimes one or two people would be allowed to stay as exceptions to the rule, and that gave me some ideas about how to create that I wanted this to be a sundown town, and I wanted to create a mystery around that.
And it really works, because the thing is too that when you're the exception, you really don't know. So watching your cast figure out what it means for each of them at different points, it's pretty terrific. But can we talk about influences for a second? Because, again, like I said earlier in the show, like I didn't know anything about you, but knowing that you come out of television and film, there's a very cinematic flow to the narrative here. You do set pieces really well. You do dialogue really well. Like the story is always moving forward. So there are some influences that I can see coming from outside of books, but you do have an MFA from Columbia. It's not like you haven't studied. But can we talk about some of the literary influences and some of the writers who helped make you into the person who created Swift River?
Oh, gosh. Toni Morrison is my queen. I will say, just in terms of my experience at Columbia, Paul Beatty was a teacher of mine, and Victor Laval was my thesis reader. And so, Paul in particular, who's been an incredible mentor, talk about, telling the truth and being funny. Like he's a master at that. And so
White Boy Shuffle holds up. That book holds up. The Sellout is something that I absolutely, absolutely, absolutely love. But I reread White Boy Shuffle like a couple of years ago just because I have a copy on my shelf. Dude is funny. And I think sometimes people forget how funny he is because they're like, oh, literary writer. And I'm like, yes, but also.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's so helpful to have moments where you can laugh at what's happening.
Yeah.
And it's organic laughter, because you do need a moment where you can exhale. There are some, our kid gets into some stuff. And you're also telling some of her parents' history, and there's a lot going on. And so to be able to laugh at sort of the messiness of it, it's tricky enough to talk about race and class and growing up girl, let's call it, in a lot of different ways. So to be able to have characters who are just like, and then this thing. I love Shelley. I love that character. She's a nut, but she's a good nut, and she has a good heart, and she is Diamond's friend, and she realizes she's Diamond's friend before Diamond realizes it.
Yeah.
But again, like these great characters, and they're funny and they're smart, because you have to have both, right? Like we can't just constantly be going, oh no, relentless.
So we experience life.
Exactly. So as you're structuring this book, though, because you're doing a lot of different things, we've got the epistolary piece, we've got, let's call it the present day, 87 being the present day, but then you're dropping back in time to 1980, which is his own moment. And then you're going even further back.
Yeah.
And we're dropping into Georgia for a couple of minutes, relatively speaking, right? So you've got to juggle a slightly larger cast. It's not a huge cast, but everyone's their own person. Everyone has their moment. Everyone has their turn at the mic, if you want to put it that way for a second. Yeah. But when did you know that you needed to have sort of a bigger perspective than just this kid, just her mom, just this town?
I think that, just going back to what I was saying earlier, like when I understood that she needed to be running towards something, she needed something to hope for. And so that was when, I added one perspective and one layer. And, just to say something about the epistolary form in general, it's just a beautiful way to have conversations across time and generations. Yep. And I wanted Diamond to make these connections, but I didn't want it to disturb the plot. I wanted to kind of create ripples. And so these letters allowed for a seed to be planted, and then I could show the ripples in Diamond's life. And I wanted these characters to have their own stories, their own full. And then the layers, it took a while to get the layers and all these different people to still be in conversation with themselves. They exist on their own, but they have to be in conversation. And that is thanks to my brilliant agent and editor that really helped me.
I think sometimes people forget that the novel is how you show change in time.
That's right.
Right. And letters are a beautiful way to do that, because it's not email. It's not a text. You actually have to put a stamp on it, address it, take it to the post office.
Yeah.
Things need time in transit. You don't get an immediate response, or you're reading a letter and then you wait to answer it, or you don't wait to answer it. And so watching those relationships develop, or not, as the case may be, it's a really excellent puzzle that adds another layer to it. And it's not always the kind of layer we get in a coming of age story. Were you writing sort of sequentially, or were you writing more, this is what I need to do at the moment, and then I'm just going to figure out how it all gets pieced back together?
So originally, Dad has his own perspective. Pop had his own perspective.
Oh, okay.
I had about maybe 100 pages of the book written, and it was my thesis. And the great, brilliant Victor Laval said, I kind of want to get back to Diamond. And it was, he said a lot of other brilliant things, but it was mostly because I hadn't nailed the voice, and I knew that I hadn't nailed the voice. And I think because in my heart, I understood this is a book about women, and he is better haunting the story than being a voice of the story. And so that is the point. So Diamond has her present day voice, and then she has her 9-year-old voice. So it's a whole layer of the book is her flashbacks to when she's 9 years old. And so I made the choice to take the Pop chapters and then just give them to Diamond. And so it allowed for this really poetic exploration of the world, because, a child's lens is so small. It's right. They're very literal, but except they're still attuned to these emotions. And so she was slowly understanding what was really happening to her father before he disappeared.
Kids also notice more than we give them credit for. We treat them like they're puppies, and they notice everything.
They surely do.
They know when their parents are not having a good go of things. They know when, and not because they're necessarily comparing it to someone else. It's not my neighbor next door has X, Y, and Z. It's not that. They have an internal calendar, an internal clock, whatever you want to call it. They have a center of gravity that they don't often get credit for.
Yeah.
And again, Diamond sounds like a 9-year-old. She does not sound like one of these 40-year-olds in a 9-year-old's body. She absolutely sounds like a 9-year-old. And again, you can tell, you can see this kid sort of puzzling it through and being like, all right, you people, who do I trust? Am I supposed to take adults seriously? I'm not really sure I should take any of you seriously.
Are you driving this car?
Yeah, right? What is happening here?
There are actually a couple of actual moments of that, looking at them they're a bunch of kids. How is this? You're responsible for me?
But her parents do marry when they're 18. And I'm thinking, oh man, I remember 18 and no. But again, that does feel like a much more, 70s into 80s kind of, like, there's so much that belongs to the period and this moment in our collective culture. And it's not just a Massachusetts thing. It really is just this moment in America. Do you think you would adapt this for film? I mean, it feels very cinematic in a lot of ways, but is this, because I can see the bones of a 2-hour thing.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that that I have been thinking about and talking about with my team, and I don't think that it is something that I would want to write myself. Surprise, I want to write my next book, and so I want to, I want to be involved. I'm saying I want to be. I don't even. I agree with I feel like I can't not write in a way that doesn't feel like you can also see it. It's just, it's all, the first thing I ever wanted to do was write books. That was the first thing I ever wanted to do. And then, but I had this whole life telling stories with a visual medium. And so it's in everything. It's in how a scene usually comes to me visually first. I write around the visual. I mean, I am so glad that you see that as well, because that's definitely.
Have you started the next book?
Ish. This is kind of how I know. I mean, I miss Diamond. I miss her. It took a minute to like, oh my God, it drove my poor people crazy with the. But I feel like it's, obviously it's going to be a book in a little bit, so it's done. But yeah, I have the bones of a new book, and I feel the kind of excitement that I know I need. Okay. For the momentum, and I feel very clear about it. I don't want to say it yet, but what it's about yet. But I have a lot of clarity around who the characters are. I've learned a lot in this process. I didn't ever think I could write a novel. I'm more of a short story writer, and so I really, really understand now how particularly around structure. Okay. So I am so excited to start this next story.
So when did you realize, though, that you needed to leave short stories sort of off on the side and that the novel was going to be your form? Like, was it a moment, or was it just kind of a lot of work that made you say, I think I haven't quite found the thing yet?
I think I always wanted to be a novelist. Okay. I just hadn't found the world and the story to sustain. I mean, the thing that I understand just from my TV and film background is like, there are movies and then there are TV series. And like the same idea does not go with, you need to sustain a world. And I didn't know that I had the thing to sustain a world. So even the early days of this, it was a short story, and just very wise people said, this is a book. This is a whole world. So I think I had to be told to get the confidence to do it.
Fair enough. How does it feel, though, to have Swiffer? I mean, you and I are taping a couple of weeks before the book comes out, but I mean, all of the things are Time Magazine said this is one of the 24 books you need to read this summer, and we couldn't agree more. But at the same time, like, you have 9 years is a long time to live in a world with these characters, and now you have to share them outside of your team and outside of early reads from booksellers and librarians and all of that. You're about to share a whole lot of stuff with a whole big audience. How does it feel?
Oh, it is so thrilling and so terrifying. I feel like I'm turning myself inside out, but in the best way. I mean, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. It's sort of only cliches want to pour out of my mouth. I mean, it's like I said, it was the first thing that I ever wanted. I just didn't think that I thought it was, a luxury that I couldn't pursue. And I waited a long time. And so I feel incredibly lucky that it is being embraced in the way that it is. And that I got the support that I did. I mean, I don't have any sad story about not being, I have an incredible publisher and team of people. And so I want to be, every writer talks about that, the space in between. I want to talk to people about it. I just want to be out in the world, and the waiting is torturous. but I am just so happy.
I think there are going to be a lot of people who get very excited when they meet Diamond. And I think they're going to have feelings about Diamond's mom and Diamond's dad. I think they have not met characters like mom and dad yet, which I'm super excited about. I mean, you know, you're working with this sort of classical story structure, right? And I think there are going to be people who think they know where all of this is going, and they're just, you zig a lot. When I thought you were going to zag, I was like, okay, this is cool. Keep going. Keep going, please.
Thank you. Yes. I mean, that was the thing. Particularly with Ma, I understood at a certain point that it would not work if the white people in this book were cartoon characters and were like sort of cartoonishly bad, or, you know, and it's actually, when I read, it was right around the time I discovered Citizen by Claudia Rankine, and there were some just really beautiful sections in the book where she was talking about the idea of, you know, these microaggressions coming from people that she loved. And that was a really big moment for me in how I thought about the book, that, you know, this is about being the only one in this kind of environment means you have to, you're being hurt by people you love and depend on like almost every day, right, in these very small ways. And so, but they love you, and they also show how they love you. And so I think that's the thing with Ma, is that she's really failing in many ways at being a parent, but she couldn't love her kid more. I mean, that's, you know, we know that person. And so I really, really worked hard to make her, you know, not what you expect her to be.
She's fun. She's fun even when you have your moments of, oh, honey, you need to just sit down for 2 seconds. You just need, like, as you reveal sort of her back bits as well. I had a lot of compassion for her, but at the same time, I was never in a moment where I was kind of like, oh no, mom's back. It was always, okay, what am I going to learn next? What am I going to find out next about these women? Because also Diamond is learning how to be an adult in the world, and her model is complicated.
Yeah.
Really complicated. And I think too, you know, now we live online so much. So many of us live online all the time. And so the idea that you don't have community in some ways, and yet you are of a community in other ways, it's a little bit of a mind explode. Like it does break your brain a little bit, because you kind of have to live in this dichotomy, right? Where you're like, okay, I understand all of the rules of engagement in this way, and yet there has to be more, right? Like I remember the first time I read Baldwin or Maxine Hung Kingston or Toni Morrison, like I was just starving. And yet at the same, and then Amy Tan rolls along and you're just like, hi. All of it, you know, you're just like, you're a starving adolescent, right? And it's like, oh, but I still loved John Cheever.
Yeah. Right.
And I still don't really have an explanation for it, except for the fact that Cheever can really write, you know, and maybe it's a handbook to figure out some of the other bits.
Right.
You're like, I don't know what's happening here. Did writing Swift River change you, though, and beyond realizing that you did have the novel in you, and beyond realizing you could do this, and that you've got sort of a team behind you to help get you where you're going, but did it change you as a person to finally get the story out into the world?
Oh, completely. I mean, I think it is fiction, but I had to pull from a place that was real. And so I was making discoveries about myself, and they were, you know, they weren't fueling, I mean, Diamond's journey is short. It happens over the course of 3 months. And so there's not a ton that can happen in that time period. But, oh yeah, I mean, my relationship to my home, my understanding of what I'd been carrying around, there is this kind of confidence that I developed that spilled over into all areas of my life. You know, every writer understands you have to keep showing up and writing, you know, garbage until the good stuff comes. And I think at a certain point, and then you're despondent, you know, between the good and the terrible. At a certain point, I realized that the good would come, and it sounds obvious, but you kind of have to have faith that's good, that's going to happen, or it's actually torture. That sort of spilled into all areas of my life. That kind of confidence and understanding what that feeling is when something good is coming. So, yeah, it was transformative. It changed me completely.
Which is good for us as readers because it means we get more books. That's really, I just need to know that there are more books coming. I know you can't really talk about the thing that's still an ish, but this means we will get more books. So Essie Chambers, thank you so much for joining us on Pour It Over. Swift River is out now, and it is I can't wait for you guys to meet Diamond.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun talking to you.
Hello, readers. It's time for another TBR Top Off. We're going to recommend a couple of fantastic books to pick up when you stop in for your copy of Swift River. I'm Marc at my Barnes & Noble in Cincinnati, and I'm joined by my book buddy, Jamie, out near Kansas City. Hello, Jamie. How are you?
I'm good, Marc. How are you?
I am fantastic. I haven't talked to you about books in a while, so I really missed this, so I'm glad we're back in it. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off, if you're cool with that, because I was thinking about Swift River quite a bit. I'm really excited for folks to read this. And I was thinking about the book's really lovely and deep themes of that love and pain that is passed down through generations. And it made me think of a more recent paperback release called Within Arm's Reach by Napolitano. This was May's fiction pick for Barnes & Noble, and it is excellent. It's a wonderful look at the ins and outs of a large family trying to kind of maintain its facade of everything is going fine to varying degrees of success. So we follow the McLaughlins, which is this very large Irish Catholic family that really is starting to tear at the seams due to a pregnancy announcement. There are lots of thoughts and feelings around this, particularly from the matriarch of the family, who really in this moment in her life is taking stock of her family's history while coming to terms with her family's present and their future. So the book moves between different family members' points of view, and each one has their own take on the state of things, has their own baggage that they're carrying with this, but then you get to see those connective threads that big families, and really families in general, just have it ingrained. So as you move through this family, kind of like a big giant house full of rooms, you get to explore each a little bit more, and it kind of broadens into this big sort of tapestry of a very realized family. The baked in bonds and also sort of the bristling edges connect in a really satisfying way. I come from a very large family. I'm the youngest of 6. And I feel like Napolitano just really nailed it when it comes to a large family, the complications that are involved between family members, that tension, but also that beautiful love and that sort of unspoken, yes, I've got your back feel that kind of make up the individual pieces as well as the whole of what a family really means. So please check out Within Arm's Reach by Napolitano. Jamie, what do you have for us?
All right, so I'm going to come at this from a nonfiction point of view, which is something I like to do. And I'm going to recommend James Loewen's fascinating book, Sundown Towns. Okay. Essie Chambers said when she wrote Swift River, she specifically wrote it knowing that Diamond would be the descendant of one of the only Black residents of a sundown town who was someone allowed to remain in the town after dark. Most people don't know much of anything, I think, about sundown towns, I'm guessing anyway, and the prevalence of them across the northern half of the United States in particular is interesting. And looking back now, Loewen, who's a sociologist or who was a sociologist, describes a disturbing and fascinating phenomenon, which was, thousands of white towns where there was an unspoken or sometimes spoken rule that if you're Black, you're not welcome here. The history, it's a scholarly history book, but it's also accessible. And it's looking at a period from about 1870, Reconstruction right after the Civil War, to really the mid-20th century, almost 100 years, at a time of small town lynchings and African Americans being run out of town through acts of abhorrent violence and abuse by both their fellow citizens and government officials. And this extended through the mid-century, I think, as the FHA and suburban developers effectively created segregated communities. We recognize, I think, all of us, that around our cities, there are often affluent white neighborhoods that still flourish today, that kept Black people excluded from the outset, often through the neighborhood bylaws or through racist redlining by banks who denied mortgage loans to people of color. But I think fewer people are aware of these tactics used specifically in these sundown towns, where basically Black residents were warned, don't let the sun go down on you in this town, or something terrible is going to happen to you. They were met with not just exclusion, but with brutal violence. Some towns posted signs with racial slurs at the entrance, warning African Americans to keep out or else. Minorities were allowed to work in the town and be in there during the day, especially if they had a service position to fulfill, but they couldn't reside there or even spend a night. They had to leave at dark, and if they were found within the city limits after dark, the results would be swift and violent and sometimes fatal. Sometimes there'd be an exception. So, for example, a Black woman who was a live-in nanny or another household servant who was seen as less threatening or more trustworthy, they might be allowed to stay in that home while all the other minorities in town were eventually run off. And this was a detail that jumped out at Essie Chambers when she was writing Swift River. So if you look around your community and you see racial segregation in the neighborhoods around it today, it's likely that that's a result of redlining or even a sundown town in its past. James Loewen passed away in 2021, but his work continues today. There is now a historical database of sundown towns from all the states, and it's a registry where you can see where people were kept from living because that community wanted to remain all white on purpose. And if you read Sundown Towns and you love it, please pick up Lies My Teacher Told Me by the same author, by James Loewen. It's one of those books that everyone should read, and you should have that on yourself. So again, that's Sundown Town by James W. Loewen. Mark?
Oh, fantastic. I mean, I feel like Swift River is that beautiful overlap and Venn diagram situation between the care and secrets of a family and the very harsh reality of our history and nation. So just like fits beautifully in the center of those two books. So as always, Jamie, you nailed it. Thank you so much. But that's all we have for today. Thanks for tuning in to Poured Over. Please make sure to give us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can also follow us on our socials at Barnes & Noble. Pretty simple. I'm Mark. You can follow my home store at BN Westchester. Jamie, where can we find you?
I'm in Kansas City. You can follow my home store at BN Plaza KC.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Happy reading. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.